Hare Ganga Mahadev Sri Shankara Parvati Pati Mahadev Sri Shankara.
Namaste, it's Sahara Rose, and welcome back to the Highest Self podcast, a place where I discuss what makes you your soul's highest evolvement. I have lived in Miami now for the past 6 weeks or so, and I gotta say, I'm so happy that I am here. You know, I had a lot of fear leaving LA, where I have lived for 7 years, and that is where I met my husband, and just so much gratitude for that city and place. But this quarantine really got us thinking, you know, with my husband's business being shut down, working in the music industry, and my business being online, of, well, do we need to be here? Do we want to be here? Where would we prefer to be? And that got us thinking of so many different places, and really landing on Miami because I love the tropical weather and the beach and just living closer to a beautiful turquoise ocean that I can swim in. And for him, he loves the music and the city and being able to see lights at night. So we found this beautiful place that's right on the beach and also has a beautiful city skyline. So it has been amazing being here. And one of my biggest fears was losing touch with my community. I am someone that has a 4 in my human design, meaning I'm all about community. You know, I'm the founder of Rose Gold Goddesses, the Sacred Sisterhood Collective, all about embodying the goddess within. And community is something that really, really, really matters to me. I feel my best when I am around friends, doing rituals, diving deep, masterminding. I really get my best thoughts when I'm around people. And it's something that I've learned a lot about myself through the years of, you know, doing this podcast, and how much I prefer doing that to just writing alone, and how much deeper I can get to my own truth when I'm in that communication. So I had a lot of fear around leaving LA, having made so many friends and people who are just doing such great things with their lives. And the great thing I have to report is that since moving to Miami, I have actually been able to see more people than I have been in LA, because Miami is such a kind of like holiday spot for so many people. So people will stop by, be here for a couple of days. I'll get to see them. And it has been amazing because I've seen so many of my friends from LA, including the 2 who will be on the podcast today, Krista and Lindsey from the Almost 30 podcast. So I met Krista and Lindsey, I want to say 3-4 years ago, like 3.5 years ago. And it was like right after I had started High Self podcast. So at this time, my first book, Idiot's Guide to Ayurveda, was coming out, and linked up with them, and they had me on their podcast and I had them on mine, and we just became friends. And it has been amazing to just witness their spiritual growth journeys, their personal growth journeys over the past couple of years, and to learn more about their backgrounds. And when I was writing Discover Your Dharma, which is a Vedic guide to finding your purpose, I was really trying to think of as many different examples of people living their Dharma as possible. I feel like oftentimes when we think of someone finding their purpose, it's like they quit their job and they like lived in a van, and then suddenly they thought up of Uber, and here they are living their purpose, and it's worth $1 billion. And it's like, that's awesome. And that's someone's story, and it's not everyone's. So I wanted to offer as many different perspectives as possible, different ways that you can find your service. And in this book, I mean, you can really tell that I have an Ayurvedic background, because everything I'm like, well, there are different archetypes for this and there are different archetypes for that. So for example, I list out, there are 3 paths to finding your Dharma. There are 4 types of Dharma. There are 9 Dharma archetypes. There are 5 stages of Dharma discovery. There's a 5-part Dharma blueprint process. Like, it's like all of these different like frameworks that you can really plug into to, you know, the point of it is so you can understand yourself better, and you're not going to be totally able to be defined by one thing, but you'll be able to see yourself in something that is so much greater than you, and see the synchronicities and the commonalities between yourself and your journey and other people's. So when I was writing Discover Your Dharma, you really wanted to share also the story of someone who didn't take this big leap, who didn't just quit their job and try to make their thing happen, then it just happened. I wanted to also share the story of someone who transitioned, someone who step by step was building their thing and understanding what their Dharma is and trying to get it off the ground while having a 9-to-5 job. And I feel like we don't hear that story that much. We don't get to hear those success stories. And I immediately thought of my friend Krista, who is one of the hosts of Almost 30, because that was her experience of meeting her and then finding out she had this 9-to-5 job. For me, I was like, wait, what? Like, how? Like, you have this amazing podcast. But I was like, oh, that makes total sense because the podcast is still new. And as we know, it takes a long time to monetize something like a podcast, social media platform, blog, etc. So it was amazing for me to witness over the course of the year her finally growing her podcast to the point that she could quit her job and be supported by the podcast. So I wanted to include that story in the book and then have them on the podcast today to talk about both of their journeys towards their Dharma, which are unique and intertwined and beautiful. So this episode is really like three girlfriends telling their stories and talking about their fears and what has held them back. And then also where we are today as female business owners, as content creators, as people who are focused on bringing spirituality and wellness to the world, the roadblocks that we still experience today, because that never fully ends. So you're going to hear their stories, their limiting beliefs, their roadblocks. I also wanted to talk about just the common obstacles I've heard from the community members, such as feeling imposter syndrome, like you're not good enough, like you don't have anything important to share, how they've overcome those feelings. And then we also, at the end of the episode, dive into different obstacles that we are having in the stages of our businesses that we are at right now, just to show you that it's not like this one-time stop that you're just like there and then you're at your Dharma and that's it. It's more of a mountain range, and you reach one hill and then you go down and you reach another and you go down, and it's more of a spiral than it is this like ladder that you go up. So I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. It was so much fun to be a part of, and I hope it's so much fun for you to listen. So without further ado, let's welcome Krista and Lindsey to the Highest Self podcast. And before we get started, I have an announcement for you. So on my own spiritual journey, I realized that I wasn't resonating with more information. I always felt like there was another book, another thing to do, another way to become, and I was really yearning for a form of spirituality that invited my whole self, my femininity, my creativity, my desire to be in my physical body, in my pleasure, in my joy, in my heart, in my womb, in my dance. For me, spirituality is not about leaving the body, but really about being so immersed in it that you become one with it. So this month in Rose Gold Goddesses, the Sacred Sisterhood Collective, all about embodying the goddess within, we are diving deep into Shakti, which is this principle, this essence of divine feminine wisdom. I take you on a journey to learn about how Shakti shows up in you, how she is your breath, your body, your desire to be immersed in all things rather than separate from it. We dive deep into the differences between spirit and soul, and I guide you through practices and rituals to connect more to the Shakti essence that lives inside of you. The path of the goddess is not to detach yourself from the world enough that you can handle being in it, but rather creating the world you desire to be a part of. And that is what we are doing this month in Rose Gold Goddesses. So if this is calling your name, you're seeking to make dance and embodiment your spiritual practice, then come join us in this Rose Gold Goddesses circle. It is included in your membership at rosegoldgoddesses.com, or you can try it on its own at rosegoldgoddesses.com/Shakti. You can find those links in the show notes, and I'm super excited to invite you inside. Welcome, Lindsey and Krista, to the Highest Self podcast.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you guys here in beautiful Miami. We just did your amazing Almost 30 podcast, and I'm so excited to jam with you today. And the first question I'd love to ask you both is, what makes you your highest self? So we'll start with you, Krista.
Oh my gosh. What makes me my highest self? I feel like when I think interviewing, to be honest, I've always been a question asker. And it was almost my trauma being younger that there was no attention on me. So I got attention by asking people about themselves and by listening. And it was sort of my way to also maneuver in the world, because it was like, how could I distract people? How can I move the attention off of me but onto them? So being in with a narcissistic mother, that really happens. So it really is though my Dharma, because it has been traumatic for me, but it also is where I can use all my gifts. Mm-hmm. And it's where I feel the most valuable and I feel the most present. There's a presence of asking questions and interviewing that I really, really enjoy. So I think interviewing and asking questions.
I love that. And we were just talking, you're the researcher archetype too. So we'll dive into that. And what about you, Lindsey?
I am my highest self Truly, when I was reading your book, actually, and I was doing the little quiz, there was a question, and one of the answers that I most resonated with was creating by yourself. No offense taken. It's more like when I'm by myself and I'm able to, like, especially singing with music, I'm an empath. So like sometimes when I have a lot of energy around me, I forget what my own energy feels like. So when I'm by myself, I really feel the resonance of my highest self. And lately it's really been music.
This
Almost
is
30's done.
So
This is our last.
This is our announcement.
goodbye. Here on the Highest Self podcast. You heard it first.
We're looking for press.
But this is so exciting for me because you guys are the first people I get to interview who, first of all, are written about in the book, but also I'm like, I want to talk about your archetypes because it makes total sense because you are the artist archetype. And the artist archetype, one of the main things about them is the reason why they're an artist is they take in so much energy. So they're able to feel like the texture of the room and the sound and like the vibration and like that's what makes them the artist, and that's what also can overwhelm them the most. And they need a lot of time in their own space and their own presence to be like, who am I? What are the things that I'm holding on to? And then how can this creation come through me? So they can be really sensitive to like loud sounds, crowded places, just like chaotic energy, and that's part of their dharma. And for you, with the researcher specifically of like asking the question and listening and observing, and even that being related to trauma, and you know, your soul even choosing your mother and choosing that experience to make you really good at that because it was preparing you for this career, it's just so in alignment to. That's why I love seeing examples of people living their dharma in this way, and then also like your different archetypes coming together to create almost 30. It's just so beautiful to see. And I'm already just so excited for this conversation.
I know, I can't wait.
So what's the meaning of life?
Well, I think that's what's hard is being in the spiritual space is on the meaning of life is that we're so exposed to so many ideas and like different meanings. And it can almost be confusing because you're like, well, I thought this was the meaning. And then I understood this is the meaning and all these things, but yeah.
And it's interesting because it's like all of these different frameworks to really say the same thing.
Yes.
You know, and it's like I can have my languaging around it and someone else can have theirs. And it kind of just shows all of our missions, all of our dharmas are the same to raise consciousness, but all of our cultures, backgrounds, experiences are going to make our way of expressing that so differently. And I think that that's the greatest reminder for people too, is it's like, choose whatever language works for you. It's really all the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like this year with consciousness has been so like apparent for me how we just are completely unconscious and just all the ways in which we are brought back to unconsciousness through media, through our phones, through the news, through all these different distractions that we live and exist with. It's like very hard and traumatic to be conscious all the time, or that's the belief or perception. And it's been interesting to see how as we raise consciousness naturally, all the ways in which that the opposite side is trying to keep us unconscious.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, one of the stages of awakening, of being like, oh shit, the world is fucked up, you know, and you're like, how am I going to live in this world? And then you feel like you're going crazy and you're like, how is everyone doing this? And, you know, you just want to leave and escape and figure it out. And you need to go through that process. And then you find integration. And it's like you go like from in, you go up, and then you come back in. And it's like, okay, how can I in this world now? Obviously, if I'm born here, there's a reason why I'm here too. I'm not free from it. And how can I make it a better place?
And I think there is that disconnection from like, I am here for a purpose. A lot of people are like, why am I even here?
Yeah.
Why am I needed? You know, there is just that disconnection from like, no, like you were created perfectly, like by source, by God, like, and yeah, that's what's so, and I've definitely had those moments too, where I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know why I'm here. But truly, some people are living that truth of, I don't know why I'm here and I shouldn't even be here.
Yeah.
And it could be so sad. It could be really, really sad.
Yeah. I mean, and that's part of, you know, their experience to remember. And it's like those different points of the rock bottoms we have to experience. So I want to talk about both of your journeys because I'm sure a lot of listeners listen to Almost 30 as well and have seen your own journeys the past 4 years, I want to say, that you've been podcasting and, you know, it going really from a hobby of something you're like this could be fun, and it becoming both of your careers and your missions and something so much greater than you. And I wrote about you, Krista, in the book about your transition. I know you've spoken a lot about transitioning from corporate into doing this full time. So can you share a little bit more about that journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Ohio. And in Ohio, no one really had the idea or belief that you could do what you loved. So everyone around me was just kind of living this life where they had a job. They didn't find their passion. They didn't pursue their passion. So that was sort of my ideal, is that you go to a school, we all go to college. That was like kind of the goal, to go to a college. And then you just work in a job and you have kids and you get a car and you get a house and all the things. And for most of my life, I felt really uncomfortable with status quo and really uncomfortable wherever I was. I was really happy. I was popular. People really liked me. But in my head, I was never really satisfied with anything that was going on. So I went to college where I was like deeply unhappy internally, although on the external, you would think that I was really, really happy and thriving. I remember I used to like drink and just get drunk because I was like, how do I escape these boring ass conversations and this life? And so after that, I got a job in management consulting and finance. I was excited by the money and really didn't have any dream for myself outside of anything. And through that, I got, multiple jobs in the corporate world because I was always trying to find and just search and see if there was something else that was a better fit for me. I was in management consulting. I was in digital marketing. I was in events. So I was all over the board and I never felt happy. I thought if I found the right job, I would eventually be happy and I could just like be normal. I was like, I just want to be normal. But when I found SoulCycle, when I was in New York, I fell in love and I decided I wanted to be a SoulCycle instructor because I loved the energy, I loved the movement, and I thought it was for me. So I tried to manifest it as best as possible and really just did everything I could. I lost all the weight, I got super fit, I got in with all these instructors, and when I auditioned, I didn't get it. So I was like, okay, I have to figure out another way to get it. And what made me the most uncomfortable in my audition was hearing my voice on a microphone. So I went to a vocal coach in New York every lunch break for a year and got really, really comfortable with myself on a microphone. I learned how to use my voice. I learned how to use my breath and would just pay out of pocket and leave for lunch every day at work or every Wednesday at work. And what I didn't know was that would be for almost 30 and that would be for my career now, but I thought it was for SoulCycle at the time. So I said I needed to get connected to a SoulCycle instructor. I needed to get connected to someone else that was in the company to help me with my audition. Someone connected me with Lindsay, so we got connected. And although I didn't make my audition, the second time, I was connected with her. So we started to have these deep conversations, which eventually led to almost 30. But in that time, I had moved to Los Angeles and quit my job to pursue blogging. I thought I wanted to be a blogger full time. So I was like, I'm gonna have a podcast as a passion and I'm gonna blog full time. It's gonna be my thing. So I tried to blog, didn't really work, got myself in maybe $9,000 of credit card debt, and just was like, I need to find another full-time job. I'm just going to be in these jobs my whole life. So I found a full-time job that I was at for 2 years, but that was really important for me because it was what allowed me to build almost 30 with Lindsay. So where I followed the prescriptive advice of follow your dreams and your passions and quit your job and try to make it work. That's what I did with blogging, and it didn't work for me. I got in debt. I had no plan. I had no strategy, and I really didn't know what I was doing. So when we were going to quit for almost 30 and make the transition from me being at my corporate job and her being at SoulCycle, I knew we had to be much more strategic. And when we talk about the transition, like in your book, when we're talking about that transition from being at the corporate job to pursuing my passion full time, it never really was comfortable and it never really was easy, but it was something that like I knew in my heart, if we worked hard enough, we would make happen. So it took over 2 years. And, I never thought we would be at this place. But right when we quit, I knew that we saw how much more money I made. I knew the universe would support us in the way. So it's been a really long journey, but it's been really beautiful to see all the ways in which that I've been supported in all the decisions that I've made.
I love that story so much because we so celebrate the leap and we think everyone who's made it has taken this leap and she moved to LA and became a blogger and now she's in almost 30, and like that wasn't the case for you. It wasn't your blog. It was you actually going back to having the stability of a job so you wouldn't have to stress out and get into further debt and be like trying to make this thing happen that wasn't working for you, instead of having this stability and this knowing that you could build something that's authentic and you don't have to like strive and monetize it and like make decisions that you probably would have regretted today had you from day one just been trying to make money off of it. So my question is, was it hard for you to have the time to create this podcast and community and do all of the things related to your Dharma when you had a full-time job?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing, when I know people who want to find their purpose and their passion, they're really excited about it. You really have to put in the time. And I see so many people that have full-time jobs essentially making excuses. I have my job, we're working all these things. When you want something, you'll make it happen. So for me, that was in the morning before work or at the lunch break at work or on the weekends or nights. And we really just, used our time as flexibly as we could. I would take Fridays from home. We would do interviews, and it wasn't as honest as it could have been. I definitely was like pushing the boundaries a little bit, but I knew what I had to do to make what happened, and my work really wasn't my heart goal or priority. So as another thing too, with my work, I wasn't ever hanging out with anyone at work. I wasn't ever reading blogs at work. I wasn't looking at the news. I wasn't on Facebook. I was barely on social media because I was so focused on what we're doing. So when we look at our day really analytically, which is what I did, I would see, okay, how much time am I spending in the morning on social media? 20 minutes. I could probably cut that out and really focus on almost 30. With lunch, am I talking to people at work that I really love or really inspire me? No, I wasn't. So how much time could I save for myself in almost 30? And then I just did that throughout the day and found these like pockets and windows of maybe 3 extra hours a day, 4 extra hours a day that I really dedicated to almost 30.
I love that so much, because I think people feel like you're either at a job and you do all the things related to the job, you hang out with the people, you go to the happy hour, you do the things, and you're just like, here's my boundary. Like, don't care. This is a job that So did you join the job knowing that you were going to kind of use this as your way out too, or you just thought this is just my life?
No, I thought it was my life. I was just like, oh, it's my life. I intuitively know that it wasn't, but I thought it was going to be my life. I was like, I need to get out of debt. I need to be realistic. I need to be responsible. And we were building it. I always wanted it to be it, but I really went in just like, I have to get myself out of debt, and I have to get myself away from the discomfort of feeling broke, because I hated to be broke. And I also, too, when we were building almost 30, I was blogging, and then I was serving, and I was nannying. So I was doing all these jobs. And I remember I was like, I'm working maybe 60 hours a week, and I'm making like $1,000 or something. And I'm like, damn, if I'm at a full-time job, I'm working 40 and I'm making $2,000, maybe say $2,000 a week. I'm like, the hours, I have to be making more. I was like, if I want more hours for almost 30, say from 60 hours doing all these odd jobs to 40, I need to find a full-time job. So I always would think about things as like the hours spent and how much more time I could get back.
I love that, because we tend to feel like it's like from a full-time job, you go to freelancing, and then freelancing, you go to, entrepreneurship or doing your own thing. But you actually kind of just went the opposite way of, because being a freelancer is juggling a lot of different people's schedules and times and contracts and expectations, et cetera, that for some people, it's having that full-time thing actually gives them more time at the end of the day. So did you tell people that you were friends with at the time of the full-time job, like, hey, I'm, my plan is to make almost 30 work, or did you try to keep that to yourself?
I remember I had my boss at my job. I was like, I had a realization, or like a re-realization, that people at work don't have my heart interests in it for me. Like, they are not interested in what my heart wants. So I would tell my boss everything about almost 30. I'm like, oh, this is happening. And then I remember having this sit down talk with her where she was like, you are not spending enough time with this. I'm worried about you and almost 30 and all these things, and kind of gave me a talking to, that she was uncomfortable with what I was doing with almost 30. She didn't like it. She didn't want me to be spending too much time on it if it was going to take away from work. And I was like, oh yes, you cannot share that kind of thing in this corporate structure wherein a lot of people have killed their dreams to exist in this structure. So I said, in my heart, I'm like, oh, I can't share my heart desires in this sort of space. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people within the corporate world, I had to realize that over and over and over again, many times when I would share things that were outside of the box. But it was a thing where I told friends that I really wanted to first get out of debt and I wanted to eventually make almost 30 my thing. But it probably was over a year until we started making money where I was like, oh, this could be a thing. We made maybe $250 in our first year. And I was like, oh my God, this is a great side hustle. I was like, I'm going to be able to like buy dinner or something. And then when I really leaned into it and when she really leaned into it, that's when we started to make money and it started to be possible.
I love that so much. And what about you, Lindsey? What was this journey like for you?
Yeah, I grew up just down the street from Krista in Pennsylvania, just like north of Philly. And I've always been passionate about and encouraged to pursue performing, whether it was dance, singing, acting. Like I was definitely lucky enough to have like a track supported that would get me there. So that was dance classes and all the things, overscheduled child for sure. But I really did love it. You know, I was very like you, just kind of, I have a lot of home movies. My mom took a lot of home movies. And when I watch those, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. You know what I mean? Where you kind of lose that just like, all kids, truly, just have that spirit of like, no judgment. They're going from thing to thing and they're like, whatever, I want to do this. You know, it's like really sweet. And I was always like that with performing. So I actually went from public school to this private school and it specialized in performing arts. So what was interesting and why I bring up early on like that is because I did start to get the lead roles and I was quote unquote successful at that school within the theater. But what was interesting is the dynamics. It was an all-girls school and there was some jealousy as there is at that age and in schools in general. But there was like some bullying around it. So I never actually was celebrated. I was celebrated at home, like, good job, you got the lead. But was never really celebrated in school in the way that like as a kid, I would have hoped that my friends would be supportive and like really just, yeah, love seeing me like in my, like living my Dharma in a way at a young age. And I think that has like stayed with me for a long time because when I had the decision to go to college, I applied to NYU Tisch. I applied to the specialty program at Northwestern for theater, which is really hard to get into. And I was really like, I want to do this. And then there was a part of me that was like, but can I do this? And I knew it was kind of that shadow from my high school experience of just like, I don't know, like maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe, because I really did love the validation of people telling me like, yes, like you can do this. So I ended up going to Boston College. It's a great school, but it's liberal arts. And thankfully, like, God is good. And that year that I got to Boston College, the theater department only was given anonymously like $1 million. So they just like ramped everything up. It was already good, but then bringing in like visiting professors. So I really got like so much from that program. And I had the distraction of like boys and football and all of this. And I definitely felt myself just kind of pulled in every direction and not as focused as, you know, I could have been. It's the story of everyone in college, I think, at times. But anyway, I say that to say after college, I was like, okay, like I still am passionate about performing. Like this is definitely when I feel most just like in my power. And I moved to New York. And I had 3 bartending jobs. I was working at 3 different like bars, restaurants, and working every night until at least 2 a.m., sometimes 4 a.m., because bars are open late in New York. And then waking up at like, 8 or 9 to start like prepping for auditions and seeing what I had that day. I had classes, I would go to workshops, and just running myself into the ground and not realize, like, in the back of my head, it's like starving artist. This is what you do. You have side hustles. Like I started bartending in college knowing that after college, I would move to New York and get a bartending job. So I would have the cred to get a bartending job. So I just like hustling like that. Although like, I think what has prepared us for like early years of almost 30, just doing it. Just like juggling a lot of things and just doing it. You don't like, there's no question, but it also like ran me into the ground. So as like an escape, I found SoulCycle. So I was bartending, I was fit modeling, which is kind of like the non-glamorous version of fashion. You're just kind of behind the scenes. That was kind of pulling me out of the bars, which was nice. And then I found SoulCycle as like a way to wake me up in the morning. And just, it was fun. It was like dance on a bike. I was like, ooh, this feels good to be in my body. And eventually I went so much that two of the instructors, like, do you want to ride the podium? And if I rode the podium, I would get classes for free. I remember like looking at my bank account one day being like, okay, so SoulCycle class is $35. Like being like, so I probably won't like get dinner. You know what I mean? Like literally would come down to that, something so stupid. But I would go, started getting classes for free, and they're like, you should audition. I was like, no, I don't have time. I literally don't have time. I'm like bartending still, I'm fit modeling, I'm doing all these things. And they're like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I'm like, well, you're right. So I did, and I ended up getting it. 10 weeks of training every single day, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. Like I was still working on top of that, trying to juggle it.
How many years?
10 weeks, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. And then after
She's
that,
like 10 years.
Yeah, no, I was like
10
years.
still
I'm still
in
in
it.
it.
You worked there for that long?
10 years.
So I took your class, and you're amazing
know, I
on the
remember.
bike, but that was like 3 years ago, I want to
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
And like 3 months into teaching in New York, I was going to the burbs. I was like kind of doing that work for them. And then they called me late one night at like 9 o'clock. Like, you can say no. And we don't have to have the conversation, but we would love to have you open up a studio in LA. Would you want to move to LA? At the time I was living with my best friend, just a lot of connections to New York and the East Coast in general. I literally didn't blink. I was like, yes, I'll go. And like, I didn't know how I was going to get there, how fast. Like I didn't ask any questions. I was like, yes, I'll go. And 4 weeks later, I was living in LA and just started teaching there and opening up a studio. And, you know, SoulCycle taught me, you know, more about being on a mic, holding space in a room, building a community. And it was the best. It truly was. Like I had such a blast. And like there was just a cycle of that SoulCycle life. And it ended, you know, a few years into the podcast. And it was like such a beautiful transition. Cause like we had worked so hard with Almost 30, continue to, and it was just like, I knew exactly why soul was in my life. And I was like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah,
It was just like
it brought
beautiful.
you guys together.
Exactly.
Which is also so interesting because it was like it was the accidental dharma for you.
Yeah.
Like you weren't seeking it. It just happened. And for you, you thought that was going to be your leap and it wasn't. So it was like you took the exact path that you needed to take, and also looking at your childhood of being overscheduled, and that became your norm of like, you're supposed to always have like 10 things to do and not have enough time for. And you were more like, okay, let me look at this from the other perspective of like, how do I really monetize each of the hours of my day? And then now you guys are both bringing that into what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that is so amazing. SoulCycle gods. Just
I know. So hilarious.
brought you here. So what was that conversation like for you guys of like, hey, we're really going to go for this full time? Like, how did that come up? Was it like one of you wanted it, but not the other one?
From what I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, we both wanted it.
Yes.
We just didn't know, like it. I remember many conversations of just like, can we? Like, just weighing like, okay, so we make this much in our jobs separately. How much are we making with Almost 30? But then also weighing in the time and energy. Like if we put even more into Almost 30, we know that would equal, you know, making more money with Almost 30 and reaching more people and all the things. So I think we both definitely wanted it. Krista went first.
Mm-hmm. I quit first because my job was just like killing me. Like I just noticed, I remember I had a friend over one day. This is like how much I cared about my job. And I was taking calls, and I got off the call and she was like, honestly, hearing you on the phone at work and then hearing you on the podcast is the craziest thing I've ever heard. She's like, you are like a dead person when you're on the phone. And I was talking about Hidden Valley Ranch advertising. I was talking about something ridiculous, and I was like, that's so true. And I was so grateful for that. But I'm very Capricorn too. I have 4 houses in Capricorn. So I'm very like quantum in the way I try and understand things. And I'm thankful for my first job for really kicking my ass with not having money and being in debt and being in scarcity, because when we quit, we had to look at how much money we had in the bank, how much she was making, how much I was making, how much we could last for 6 months, cash forecasting. There's a lot of things that people I don't think take as seriously as entrepreneurs learn to do. And you really have to play in manifestation, in truth, in worthiness, but you also have to play in 3D and really be serious about how much money you're making in the way that you're living. And when I first quit, I didn't really know how much money I was spending a month. I didn't really know how much my rent was. I didn't know how much money I had coming in. So we really had to both really look at that. Do we have debt? Do we have debt we have to pay off, and really take those into consideration? And we had a situation too where it was like a few months before I quit, and we were asked to speak at this event. And it was in downtown LA. And I remember she was like, we'll have black cars pick you guys up and all this stuff, and we'll pay you, X amount. And I was like, okay. So me lying about at work, saying I had a doctor's appointment, taking a black car downtown, going on stage in front of people, speaking my truth, having fun, interviewing, being in my Dharma, I made more money in that hour than I was in 2 weeks. So in that 1 hour, I made more than 80 hours. And I was like, oh, this is actually the laws of the universe in action. When I'm aligned and when I'm in my truth, I actually can truly make more money. And I'll never forget that. I was like, oh, this is what people are talking about when they're talking about that. And so I vowed to follow that. And, the month that I quit, and then when Lindsey quit short after, we just made so much more money. It was like, I'm not talking so much more money, but for us, it was so much more money for us to live. Yeah, literally. That's when we hit 9 figures.
All about the abundance. No, but I love that. And it kind of feels like almost having a double life. It's like you have this like life that you are when you're like at your job, and then this person who you really are. And I feel like living your Dharma is being you full time.
Yes.
Not so much about your job full time, but it's being you full time. And when you're having to step into a situation where you're not yourself, and that's a daily thing that you do, that's taking you away from more time that you're like incubating in your own truth.
Yeah, think about, so many of your listeners, I'm sure, and so many of Almost 30's listeners, it's like, how much of our existence do we spend in 2 lives? I spent most of my life in Ohio, in this world that I never felt like was my own. So I was used to being 2 people almost. I was used to being multiple people. I was used to being myself, which was emotional, creative, all of these things. And then having to be like fake and having to be like, let's talk about shopping. Let's watch TV. Let's drink. So it was really normal for me. I never thought I'd be able to merge 2 worlds, and I never thought I'd have to be just one person all the time. And that's really what I'm most grateful for in my life. And what I never take for granted is that I move and operate through the day mostly myself. Of course, there's always times when I'm in and out of alignment, but to be myself at most times is like the greatest gift.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about imposter syndrome because it's such a huge issue that we all experience. And, for you guys interviewing all of these people who are like the best in their fields, whether they're authors or spiritual teachers or wellness gurus or whatever else, did that ever bring up imposter syndrome for you guys, and this feeling of like, who am I? What story do I have to share?
I think that when it comes, we interview so many incredible people like you do. And I don't know if I experienced imposter syndrome with our guests. There was like deep respect and like kind of this overwhelm of like wanting to dive more deeply into what they were teaching or their expertise or implemented in my life. For me, the imposter syndrome came from like those closest to me. Having a business partner who is just like so sharp in business and all of these things, it's like when you're with it every day, you're like, I should be more like that. I should be more like that. Or with siblings, with my sisters. I always say my siblings are so much more talented than me. I just wanted like more spotlight. But like comparing myself to them in a lot of ways, I do have a comparison thing. And therefore that translates into, I guess, would be imposter syndrome of like, should I be here? Like, am I enough? But as of late, I've really, really been working on it in therapy and breath work and other modalities. And it feels really good. And it's just like simply to love the parts of you that you tend to hate the most, like just really being in love with it and being in that heart space of like, our conversation with you on our podcast, just that, you are here for a purpose, and all the parts of you are working together to work for that purpose and contribute to the collective Dharma as well. And I just started to recognize that in so many different ways and really love like the uniqueness of that. But it's a constant thing I have to check myself with.
Yeah, and I think it's like, sometimes I think about being an imposter like in a good way. It's like, I've always felt like I've been the most conscious, awake person. And for a while it was really painful, but now it's like one of my gifts. And if we can really see that like moment where we're feeling other, we're feeling different, it's like, what is that conscious awareness that we're bringing to the situation that we can alchemize within ourselves? But I think I feel most imposter syndrome when I'm with our friends. Like, not because our friends are not loving and kind and warm and all of these things, but we hang out with very talented, successful people. Like, our friends are incredible. They're people that most people look up to. So it's in those moments where we're talking about business. We're talking about, I'm making this much money, I'm doing this, I'm doing these things. And it's not that I feel other or less than, but I feel that moment of like, oh, who am I? Like, look at them. Like, what am I doing? Like, am I doing enough? Am I doing these things? And it's amazing that we can be in these safe spaces with people where you're like, oh, I remember that I'm hanging out with them. They see something in me that I also see in them. So it's really that healing too of like female relationships where I lean on that healing to also alchemize the imposter syndrome that I have with our friends.
Yeah, and I think that, we can take people being more successful than us in like two ways. We could take it as like, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. Or we could take it as like, that's really inspiring. And like, and they're hanging out with me, that means I have something to give too. And it takes relearning and retraining your mind to go to the latter. But it's like, that's actually what I love about like, well, I don't live in LA anymore, but like being in LA, you meet so many incredible people that it really expands your horizon of what's possible for you too, because you see all of these other people doing it. And I think, having a podcast too is like, you get to have conversations like this for your job. So it's like, I feel like in our society, we're so quick. We're just like, oh, let's just shoot each other a voice note. And like, that's almost what a friendship is these days. And like a podcast actually gives you the time and space that both people want to be there and you can really dive deep. And then I'm sure for you guys, it has been like ultimate personal development of like being able to like sit with the exact people you want to sit with and talk to them about all of these things and have that firsthand perspective and, just witnessing both of your spiritual growth journeys over the past like 3 or 4 years that I've known you guys. When we did the podcast like 3.5 years ago in 2017, like I had just started my podcast and like, I can feel all these conversations effects and impact on you guys too. And it's also your soul choosing that for that reason. I know this episode is good, but so is this sponsor. It's officially fall, Vata season, and you know what that means. Pumpkin spice everything. So if you're a High Self podcast listener, you probably love pumpkin spice lattes, but you probably don't love the sugar, the dairy, etc. that goes into them. Well, I have something just for you. So I've been talking about Organifi products for a really long time, but this season they have their special pumpkin spice gold recipe, which is insane. It has turmeric, ginger, reishi mushroom, lemon balm, turkey tail mushroom, allspice. It literally tastes like a pumpkin spice latte without the sugar plus all of the superfoods. So you can find this in all of their other incredible products, including their gold chocolate, their green, their red juice, so many wonderful things to keep your immune system really healthy, strong, and vibrant, and also help you with just the stress levels that we're experiencing right now over on their website at Organifi.com using coupon code Sahara for your 20% discount. That's Organifi, ORGANIFI.com with coupon code Sahara, and you can find that link in the show notes.
What do you do? Like imposter syndrome, when do you feel it the most?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty like motivating. Like, I don't really take it as a I'm not enough thing. I take it as like, ooh, I want to get there and get there. And maybe it's like the Capricornness, but it's just like more so like puts a fire under my ass to keep going. And I also have that like desire to ask questions and learn. Like, I just want to like learn more about how they did it, etc. But yeah, I think the times that I did feel the most imposter syndrome were, before I had actually done anything, when, I would like read a book and I could feel in my soul I could write a book like this too, but I hadn't. So I would like hate on that person. I'm like, this book sucks. This is so basic. Anyone could write this book. But it was because my own soul knew that I could do it, but I was so triggered that these other people had stepped into their purpose in a way that I had not yet.
And I think that's the thing for so many people is, once you have that consciousness to realize what triggers you, and what triggers you is really like a guidepost to where you should go, everything changes. And I've had that this year with people that I'm very close with, just seeing them be very much in their truth and feeling this year like I wasn't in my truth or haven't been fully in my truth for a while. It was not incredibly triggering for me, but I would really notice, I'm like, oh, I don't want to read their content right now because I'm feeling like I should be saying that. I'm feeling like I want to speak my truth. I want to say those things. But now it's really like, okay, what's my guidepost to really come back to myself and really see that as a perfect example of what it feels like or looks like when someone's actually speaking in their truth.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, I get messages, I don't know if you guys have gotten them too, of people being like, I was super triggered by you. And I would like, want to do something and see you had already done it.
I don't think we're successful enough, to be honest. You know who else gets those all the time?
True.
Jordan Younger.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess Jordan and I have been blogging for a long time, but so, and I get them a lot, and in a way it kind of hurts.
Of course.
To
That's what she said. She's like, this is not nice.
It doesn't feel good. I'm like, wait, I triggered you. I'm just trying to be liked too,
Of course.
But it's interesting because I'm like, for example, people like, Deepak Chopra is just more of like grandfather, like someone like Gabby Bernstein for me. I was like, oh my God, like I wish I could do something like that. I know for you guys too, like she's such a great role model of someone who really has stepped into her power and, has done it. That to me, it was like almost like, it was so inspirational. It was like too much. Whereas now I like know her personally as you guys do. And I'm like, oh my God, love her. She's amazing. And she's still someone who's super inspiring for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What was Shaman Durek said one time in the sessions or something? He's like, if you're not triggering people, you're not trying.
Yeah.
And it was really true. It was like the thought of like, if you are not triggering people, and it's not in the way of you're running around talking about things that are triggering, but people being in their power and in their truth will be triggering to people that it's not. And so it's an interesting way to think about it. And I do think about that often with like, we get feedback or something like that. I'll be like, okay, well that's my soul's, I'm going to take that critically and understand it, but also it's my soul doing its job to activate people. And I'm going to activate people, either they're going to be excited or mad or all these things, and that's normal.
So how do you guys navigate that? Because for me, that was one of my biggest fears of like my first book coming out of like, people are going to write bad reviews and they're going to hate me. So how did you navigate towards like putting out podcasts and getting bad reviews and bad feedback and not taking it personally?
Yeah, it's been a process. I think, towards the beginning, it would stop us in our tracks. Like it would ruin a day.
Yeah, 100%.
We could have 100 good things happen in a day, and that one review, we're like,
I would like
think
go
it
back
is?
to it and reread it like 80 times. And the good one, I was just like, oh, another day.
Now I just feel like we have a better understanding of, to your point, triggers and people's shadows and just like how they're playing out and the projection and really individual healing that is happening. And that's not to say that sometimes we don't get a little rocked, but now it is so much, it's like what you focus on will definitely grow and continue to perpetuate. And so it's just been a practice to not focus on it. There is an acknowledgement, and if it hits as truth, we will absolutely like take a moment and be like, that's a good point. Let's move forward and change it or improve it. But if it feels like personal and a little icky, I'm like, oh, this has nothing to do with us. So we move on.
Yeah. It's hard for me because I have that like Aquarian side of me that sees so many sides, and I understand so many things, and I seek to understand. So whenever I see something, I seek to understand it. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting point. What would that mean about this? And what does that mean about this? And really, I take things seriously in the way that I analyze them. But it's also been something where I'm trying to move away from that, because you can't be as nebulous to change for the perception or approval of other people. So in the way that I don't take critical feedback seriously, I don't take positive feedback seriously, because I can't just be taking one side of the coin and just leveraging people's positive feedback of me and then ignoring the rest, because that doesn't make sense. So I've had to really learn with it. And what was helpful for me too was the Law of One, which is a spiritual text that I subscribe to and believe. And they talk a lot about how the greatest catalysts for growth happen within community, and they happen with mirrors. And so to understand that people are seeing within me something that they relate to or something they don't, and I'm essentially their mirror. So it's almost like I'm this projection. I don't even really exist. I exist in their mind, but they're using me as a way for them to grow and see. So as long as they're going to take it as their own catalyst for growth, then they will grow. And if they don't, and they're choosing to not see in the mirror their opportunity for growth, then they will not grow. And so I see that with the way that I look at life, and I have to hope that people will see that way. But I think it's something that for most people will deter them from doing what they want, is the belief about what other people are going to say. And I've had to, like when you were talking about earlier on our podcast, learn from a young age that I can't really care what people think. With my parents, I never really was one that was like, I never cared what my parents thought. I, to be honest, never did. And it's worked out in my favor where I just don't really mind what other people are doing because I know my path. But that doesn't mean that stuff doesn't bother me when we see it.
Yeah, I remember my husband's reading The Artist's Way, and one of the quotes in there was, "There's never been a statue of a critic." And it's like these critics, it's so easy to go around and be like, this sucks and that sucks and this documentary is the worst and your podcast stinks. And no one's going to remember you because that's what you're spending your time to do. So I try to think back. I don't write a bad review for anyone. Like even a bad Uber driver, I'm like, whatever, 5 stars. Yeah.
Same. That's the whole thing.
So like someone who takes the time to like sit down and like write this bad review, like where are they at?
Yeah.
And I'm
just
if
you think about all of our friends who are successful, all of these things, they would never. They would never. It's like we wish them well. Like if I saw something I didn't like, wish them well. That's their journey. God bless them. You can't be spending your time in that criticism with doing anything. It's no way to live, your life. It's like, okay, that wasn't for me. I'm going to move on to something else.
So I know a lot of people listening, they want to build a community, but then they're afraid of all the feedback that comes with it. It's like how you guys, community is such a huge part of what you guys do. How do you guys build a community and try to hear all the different voices when the voices are opposing, or maybe the voices are not in alignment with the choices that you're making?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the greatest learning lessons for us with community. It's like the reason why we built Almost 30 was so people would feel less alone. Being a starseed, all of us are. It's like I felt alone my whole life. I felt misunderstood most of my whole life. So I wanted people through their spiritual awakening to feel supported and to feel less alone. When you're becoming conscious, things get really funky and things get really scary and they can be really crazy. So our goal was to have people feel supported and especially to heal the mother wound, to heal the sister wound. I think we all have a deep sister wound that needs healing. So that was the goal of our community and we've done an amazing job. Our community is responsible and kind and fun and just amazingly supportive to one another. But I think this year we really learned that there is something in the collective around a narcissism that people have online. And that narcissism is related to, and this isn't talking about our community specifically, but it's talking just in general about celebrity culture and the narcissistic belief that people need to change for you. So it's saying like, Sahara, it bothers me when you wear that pink top. I want you to stop wearing that pink top.
Yeah.
When really it's a narcissistic to believe that you would do anything just for me because it's not me that needs to change, it's you. So I think that's really going on in the collective where people think that the world should change for them rather than changing for the world. And we see that quite often where people will want you to say something or talk about something or have your podcast dive into this issue or whatever. And they fail to remember that this podcast is something that Lindsey and I created. And it's really the entity that channels through us that we're working with and not their perspective. So we've really had to sort of change our relationship to feedback in the community and the ways in which we want to operate because it really needs to be our relationship together that is going to create this thing because that's what started it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. This is gold, by the way.
And when you get big, and you know this, when you get big, it's what happens is then you're responding to them and you're doing something for them, and then you're not creating what people fell in love with.
Yeah.
Then we're not creating this podcast that people loved of us on our closet floors. It's this thing that she said we should talk about and they should talk about. So it's a learning process, and it's been one of the most interesting processes to go through. But I feel better about it than before or than ever.
And I think, the piece on allowing and supporting and really cheering each other on to evolve is something that I'm noticing. It's really a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. So there is like some pain in change and evolving. There is, because part of you has to die. And so I think as we've slowly evolved as a brand, as individual people, which is like also a complication of like having a brand where you are the face of a brand, where the audience, the community is a little like it's like a little earthquake. They're like, wait, you're changing. I came to you for this reason and you're changing. And what does that say about me? Can I change, or should I change, or do I have all that I need and support to change? And yeah, it's just been a restructuring of the relationship and owning as founders, as best friends, as leaders, and as sisters to one another, that we have a responsibility to really own our evolution and not waver when the community is pulling, and this is very general talk, but like just pulling us, holding us to one standard, to one time in our life, to one thing, because we want people ultimately, as I know you do, like to come back to themselves. We are not, granted, we know we are public figures, and I say that in air quotes, but we pray that we are not on this pedestal where you're like, you are perfect, you are this, you are always this. It's like, we hope that, you know, there are pieces of what we do that inspire you to come right back to who you are, because we all share in that like love of just, evolving and just finding what feels really good to us. I think the idolization thing that happens, especially because of social media, is it gets really tricky and happens very slyly. You know, we're not up here being like, we are the best, but like, just in what we do, because we are so on purpose, like there is an idolization of sorts that can happen. And we, you know, I just pray that, you know, we can do all that we can to, just empower people.
Yeah, I see what happens too is people think like a podcast or a blog or whatever is like a product. This is the product. This is the Coke I drink. This is going to be the recipe for the rest of my life. And it's not. It's human beings speaking their truth. And that's always going to change. Your friend's going to change. Your mom's going to change. Everyone's going to change. So they're like, well, I signed up when you were this way. So this was the product that I subscribed to. And now the product is changing. So it's this feeling of entitlement. And I'm seeing this entitlement and like in the narcissism you mentioned of this feeling of like, I'm entitled to get you the exact way that I want you for free too. Because when you're listening to a podcast or reading someone's Instagram post or watching you're not paying for that. So I'm entitled to getting you exactly how I wanted you to be for free. And if you say anything that I don't like and is not in my direct viewpoint, not only will I not listen, I will go out of my way to tell everyone that you suck and that you're a fake and that you're a this and you're a that, because suddenly you're not meeting my particular needs at this moment of time. That's entitlement. And, you know, it's really important for, you know, especially people who do want to put their voices out there to recognize this, because it's something I never thought about. It's something I never really realized. I think my big fear, like when I went from Eat Feel Fresh and like my blog name, I know you were going under your blog name, and that was more focused on like food and nutrition and health, and then changing it to I Am Sahara Rose. I had so much fear and anxiety of like, will they all unfollow me? Will they not like me anymore? Like, will I be received if I'm talking about all of these other sides of my life and not giving them the thing that they wanted to do? But the thing is, it couldn't have worked. I couldn't have sustained myself to continue to fill this role that I no longer was anymore. And, you know, interestingly enough, the total opposite happened, that when I shifted into becoming me and not talking about this thing that I feel like people want to know about, this thing they don't want to know about me, when I started to put myself into the picture, I'm sure my audience is 99% different right now, but it's still bigger than it ever has been before. So we do have to trust that when we do pivot, we're going to be met by the right people, and that it's not our responsibility to make everyone happy. And some people are going to be with you for couple months of your journey. Some people are going to be for a couple of years, some people for a couple minutes, and that's okay. We can't pivot to make everyone stay with us forever, because guess what? It's never going to work.
100%. Yeah, with our coaching program for people with new podcasts, it's been something we're like hammering in, which is having the 1,000 loyal fans. You know, Kevin Kelly's book about having 1,000 loyal fans is really the goal over having millions and millions, because you can make a great living, you can make an impact, you can have a really deep relationship with them, but you're not in the position where you potentially have people that are going to turn on you or hate you or just kind of be fair weather friends or all of these things. So when people come into the world or of podcasting or blogging or social media, it's really focusing on how you can make a deep impact with like a smaller amount of people and then grow it from there. Not that I'm saying that people shouldn't have the goal to make impact on millions, but when you start really smaller, you can kind of grow into those numbers if it's part of your dharma to reach millions.
I love that. And also not being tied to those 1,000 people now own you.
Yes.
You have to keep catering to those,
100%.
because those 1,000 people will shift into another 1,000, into another 1,000, another 1,000. And that's fine too, because everyone is also on their own growth journey. And sometimes you grow different ways, and sometimes you come back together, and sometimes you don't. And that's all okay.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for people out there listening who are like, I really want to find my voice. I really want to speak my message. I want to just share my truth and show up more online. I know it's part of my dharma, but I'm really afraid of doing it. What advice do you have for them?
I guess first, I would say reflect on what scares you the most about it. Because I think when you bring awareness to that fear, it just becomes less, powerful. And I think that there are so many moments when people feel like they have to do it a certain way, and really feeling into what that expression feels like to you. Like maybe it is an Instagram post. Maybe it's an Instagram story. Maybe it's written word. Maybe it's something that someone's never done before. You get so tripped up but she did it this way and it was really successful and she got that many likes and, all the things. But really feeling into what feels like me. What feels or what lights me up the most. We had Susie Batiz on our podcast a long time ago, but she describes when she got the feeling for poopery and she just had that, it literally was like electricity throughout her body, and just feeling into that. And that takes kind of unplugging from all of the opinions and the social media. That's where I would start.
Yeah, and I think too, it's people are like, how do I speak my truth on a podcast or a blog? And it always is speaking their truth for the approval or the eyes of others. And it's are you telling your boyfriend what you want for dinner? Or are you telling him that you don't know, even though you fucking know? Mm-hmm. It's how in these small moments of are you telling someone you're having a great day and you're not? It always has to be, how can I speak my truth for the approval of social media or the perception of others? And people can't even see their truth to themselves. Mm-hmm. How do I feel today? I feel good. Do you feel good today? Mm-hmm. Actually tell the truth to yourself. Tell the truth to people you love, to people that you're close with. And don't worry about telling your truth on a podcast, to social media, all these things. It's that will happen in due time if it's meant to. And if you're doing it in true servitude for the collective and not for your ego.
I think that's so important. The more that you could speak your truth to the people around you, the easier it gets on doing things online. You actually can't do it online without doing it in person. And your method of communication, your feeling, your being more in your heart, that all comes from, the only thing that can come through is living it, and living it in every single choice, having that hard conversation, saying that thing that you want to say. I know for me, whenever there's a conversation I need to have, but I'm not, it's I repeat it over and over and over again in my mind until it's just okay, I need to say this because I can't use any more mental energy on this anymore. Yeah. And it's try to not get to that point. Try to just say it when you want to say it. Yeah,
there's quantum residue when we're having those conversations and we're not in the moment. It's that's just using your energy expeditiously when you're having that, or you're having the fight, or you're having the conversation you never had, and you're just using a lot of your energy that you don't even know about it in that way.
Well, yeah, 80% of our thoughts are recycled thoughts from the day before. So imagine if we use those 80% on new thoughts, how far we would come.
And I also think those hard conversations, or that fear of speaking your truth, is never as scary as you build it up to be. So it is kind of a leap moment. You know what I mean? And I think especially those conversations and telling the truth to either yourself or the people that you love, they've been waiting for you to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? People feel.
Yeah. And so most people don't know how to start it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the starting is the hardest.
Yeah.
Because you're I think once you start, it's good. It's just the starting.
The starting is it can feel really awkward because we're not taught. We're not taught, here's how to bring up a really difficult conversation you've been mentally rehearsing in your mind for 9 months. How does that happen?
Oh my God, it's so true.
But then once you do bring it up, that person's also been rehearsing their role, waiting for you to bring it up. So it's why have we been waiting so long to say this?
And it's such a gift to other people, because I'm sure whether it's with you or someone else, they've been meaning to do or speak their truth. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just the last question, for you guys being a team doing this together. And for me, this year has really been around figuring out team and finding someone who gets me, who I can work with. And then also the challenges of trying different people and it not working together. I know you guys have shared podcasts of different healing and stuff you have done. So what advice do you have for someone who is wanting to start some sort of business project, podcast with someone else that you wish you had known going into it?
I think I wish I would have known. I think we had everything we need to know, but I think we've learned so much along the way. So I wouldn't do anything differently if we had not succeeded. I would say, I wish I would have known that it's really so much more serious than people think. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to start a podcast, so I'm going to like hitch my dream onto someone else because I'm really insecure to bring it to life myself.
Yes.
I think that happens the most, where that wasn't the case with us, but people will be scared to bring through what they want to bring through by themselves, so they want to have someone else be a part of it. And I think that happens more particularly with women than it does with men because of our fear of judgment and failure.
It's like in high school, you couldn't do anything alone. You have to like bring someone to do it.
Yeah. Be like, my friend said that you blah, 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 blah. It's funny when I used to be in like art, this used to be my tactic with boys I was dating. I used to be like, well, my friend said that you don't blah, blah, blah. And I'd like communicate through my friends to them. Like I'd be like, well, my friend said that what do you think about that? So annoying. But we share dreams, vision, money, time, energy, so many things. So it's so much more than just us having fun on a podcast. Our business is a living, breathing thing. So we've really had to work super hard on our relationship, and it's been really hard at times. We've had those conversations in our head all day long where we're not speaking our truth, we're not talking to one another, we're not being really honest. And I think this year has been, the best year for us because we've been able to just really realize how special what we have is and sort of step outside of ourselves and really be in service to almost 30 as a whole, rather than like our fears or insecurities or shadow that was being brought up for the first, couple years.
Yeah. And I would also say, back to the imposter syndrome, just a way to combat that is to really like continue to illuminate your own gifts and put them into practice. That doesn't mean I didn't learn things to get better at them, but there is something to really owning your own gifts and having that be the puzzle piece. And she is a particular puzzle piece. So, and I think that generates a momentum, because if you're too caught up in like, but I got to learn this and I'm not there yet, it always is that energy of I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet. So it's like in the present moment, can you really practice your own gift, give your own gift to this business, this thing, this living, breathing entity? And I think for me that just generated the most ideas, inspiration, like the next thing, rather than spending so much energy. Like you said, that 80% of thoughts from the day previously, like I could have done that better. Gosh, I like wish I was like that. And then, I would just like echo the communication piece. It's so important. And I think that's just been a theme this year for us, is like speaking our truth. And it really starts with ourselves. And then the next like closest thing truly on a day-to-day basis is each other. And just being able to like honestly communicate and really just like honor like each other's uniqueness too has been really cool, because it just creates, or it gives this like dimensionality to almost 30 that keeps showing itself, where it's like, oh yeah, like you're so good at this, or you love this. And it just like it like opens a new flower on the bush, we're like, wow, it could be this and this and this. So yeah. And then building a team is a whole other thing. I mean,
it's a vibe.
It's the first time we're doing it. And I'm like, whoa, this is actually a whole other like learning about yourself experience.
Yes. We had I've had my karma come through from my previous jobs.
Yeah.
Where we've had, no one on our team anymore, but someone that was like kind of doing their own, it was me. It was me. It was so crazy. This person, I was like, you are driving me crazy and you are me. Yeah. You have your own passion and goals and dreams outside of the business. Yeah. You are not spending a lot of time on the business. You are entitled. You are all of these things. And I was like, God damn it. And I was like blessed.
Well, it makes you feel for your former bosses.
Yes. Yeah. I literally reached out to my bosses that week and was like, I just want to apologize for being a complete asshole at times. Like, I know you had your thing, but hopefully that karma is done. But a team is a whole entity, as you know.
It's a whole thing. Yeah, for me, the most important thing is making sure everyone's actually in alignment with their dharma. And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, well, my dharma can't be,
or their cycle.
Yeah, like, but like if you're not seeing this as part of your mission, if your mission is not alignment with my mission, or you're seeing this as a stepping stone to something else, like I'm not your person for that. Like, I'm trying to build people who are like, I love to organize. I love to be in the back end. I love to support. Like, this is actually my Dharma and it's giving me life, because all of that is needed to take, it's not like we just hop on this podcast and that's it. There's a bazillion steps that people don't see that goes behind the scenes. And there's so many people whose roles are to be that. They want to be that. But I think for me, the most challenging part is like finding those people, because oftentimes like the people that we speak to are people who want to do exactly what we are doing. So it's like, how do we find the people who like love organizing technology? Like, where are they?
100%.
Hit me up, slide in.
Totally.
But they're there. And now, we're slowly finding each other in the realms.
Totally. And I think
I was thinking about like Tiffany on our team, who's been with us for 4 years. Her Dharma is like, she's organization, support, back-end management, people, like that's her.
Yeah.
And she's never wanted to be in the spotlight. She's never wanted to be anything but just a deep support, and is first in service and Shara too, I would say. First in service to our mission. That's something too that I've learned with our team, is that they need to be in service to our mission over in service to Lindsey and I. Because if they're in service to Lindsey and I, we are human beings. And so the mission stands still, and the mission is what's tried and true. And the mission is what we seek to serve. Make people feel less alone, help them in their conscious evolution. But Lindsey and I are going to have days where we're not on point. We're not being overly nice. We're not well. We're the worst. So if you're in service to that, you're going to be let down, disappointed, whatever. So you need them to be in service of the mission first.
And it's also really challenging because, not what we preach at all, but it's like
100%.
It's like, we're like, you can be the entrepreneur, you can create your dream life, you can do all these things, which I stand by. And I feel guilty sometimes when I'm like, you got to be about this.
Yes.
Right.
You got to be about this mission.
Exactly.
And
I think it's not everyone's path to
I
be an
know.
entrepreneur, to
Yes.
be the face of the brand, to be the person on like the book cover. And I think what's hard is because it's ours, it's hard to understand why that wouldn't be someone else's. So I feel this element of like, maybe like guilt, or like, you must want to just do what I'm doing. But it's like, no, actually some people really don't. And then it's just finding that. I think, for me, the best way I have found it is to actually go into totally other circles, like other Facebook groups that are like, and the people who work for me, some of them, listened to my podcast for years, and some of them didn't know who I was until they started working for me. And I actually love that balance.
Yeah, you have to have the balance. There can't be like the guru quality.
Yeah.
Because then they want to impress you. They feel like if they get feedback that they're bad, and you become this like mother archetype, or this like guru archetype, where they're trying to like please you or impress you the whole time, rather than like, again, serve the mission.
And I think that's the hardest thing too that happens, like when you build something. It's like you build something of like you doing all the things. Like you guys started the podcast, you're like, editing it, and you're doing the graphics, and you're coming up with the ideas, and like you're all of the things. And that's how it like blew up so quickly. And then when you have all of these other people to fulfill roles, now your job kind of goes from just a creator to a CEO. And that's a different skill set. That's a managerial skill set. So not all creators are good, quote unquote, business people, because that requires, like we were talking about, checking in with people and having like, organizational chart, and having everyone have KPIs and like all of these new things. And what I've realized in that is like, I don't like doing that, like how can I stay in my creative and like stay in my zone of doing what I do best, and not hindering the growth of the stuff that I'm unwilling to do because it's new for me, and learn about it while still honoring my own gift.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole vibe that people, I think, learn. I think all of our friends learn. You're like, whoa, I got here for this thing, but now and we think about it too with our podcast, like, how much are we actually recording versus how much are we on calls? How much are we da-da-da-da-da-da?
That's what I realized. I was like, I'm working all the time, but I'm not even working on the book. I'm working on everything behind the book.
Yes, 100%. And when we think about, like, when I go back to my time thing, where it's like I made that same amount in 2 weeks as I did in that hour, I'm like, oh, how am I not honoring that zone of genius?
Yeah.
The zone of genius.
And also for people to know that 1 hour talk that you give isn't every day.
Totally.
Like
100%.
there's a lot of work and a lot of free stuff and a lot of podcasts
100%.
and a lot of things you had to do to get to that hour. So I think people also see of like, oh, I could make $2,000 speaking in an hour. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be a speaker or whatever. And it's like, how many free, like hundreds or thousands of free, and that's the interesting thing about this time. Like social media is awesome because we can get our messages out there. And coming back to the entitlement, it's like this feeling of you have to give me so much free content day after day, year after year for me to even consider maybe ever having some sort of energetic transaction with you. So it's hard because I talk to a lot of like older, spiritual elders and medicine people, and they're like, I wrote on Instagram 6 times these whole long posts and no one's signing up for my thing. And I'm like, it's not 6 times, it's like 6 years. They were like, but I'm giving all my energy for free and they're not signing up because they're used to like someone pays them for a session and there's an exchange. Whereas with social media, there's just the playing field is this person has given this much free stuff, so now I also have to. So it's going to be interesting to see when the tipping point of this is. And I feel like we're experiencing this now, especially as like content creators of like, this isn't like I do my podcast twice a week. I think you guys are at twice a week too. And it's like, but Joe Rogan is 5 times a week. And then this person is 7 times and this person 3 times a day. And it's like, what is the level that we're all going to get to until we're like, yo, this isn't sustainable.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too with like people that want to create something or do something, podcast or speak. It's like, you're not just speaking. You're not just creating a course. You have to service an audience or customer. And people will create things, products, courses, whatever. And it's not going to do well because you need the audience first. You need the customer first. So I always find that people are kind of doing things backwards where it's like, you have to facilitate the people that are going to buy your product or trust you enough or be in your community first before you actually sell or make money or do anything. And it's the long game. That's the long game of it all. And hopefully it will pay off for most people. But most people aren't willing to do the long game for it. So it's like people posting 6 times, writing long captions, being like, hey, buy this thing. There's 100 of those things. So you really have to like differentiate yourself and build that trust first by cultivating that community. And so a lot of our job is essentially being present, showing up, giving free things, being ourselves, and being active in whatever quantum world exists or digital world that exists. And then every once in a while offering them something that they really want and selling to them.
Yeah. And I think, there's a whole other conversation of like dropping the guilt. Like I know for you guys started with like just focusing on podcast sponsors and like sharing your own thing. And I think a lot of times too, as creators who are so used to giving everything for free, it's like this feeling of like, am I going to come off as salesy? Are people not going to like me anymore? I remember I didn't even have a podcast sponsor for the first year because I thought people wouldn't listen to my podcast if I had a sponsor. Like that was my story. I was like, people hate sponsors and they'll just cancel me forever, And that's what the mind is like. It's just like, how do I be liked? How do I fit in? And it's hard because our dharmas are also to provide for us. And like back in the day, there was like the healer in the village and she was totally supported. So she didn't have to figure out a business plan. She was supported. And so is the storyteller and so is the shaman and so is this and that. And our society doesn't support that anymore. So we have the story of like, oh, you're doing something that helps me, then it should be for free. If you're charging for it, you must not really want to help me. And it's like, when I go to a doctor, be like, yo, bitch, you fake. Like, because they're charging me for
it's like the martyr
insurance.
There's a martyr complex that we have within all of our leaders have been like martyrs in a way. So it's like you have to martyr yourself to be spiritual.
Exactly.
But it's like when I look at, say you're charging $300 for a course that's going to change someone's life, help their relationship. It's like there isn't a price for that. But if you're working at some place making toxic chemicals for something, it's like, why do we think that they should be paid? But then we think that when we provide something of value that's like conscious value that we shouldn't be paid. It's like, think about all the jobs where people are making tons of money and they're actually doing damage to the earth.
100%.
Doing damage to
and no
people.
one questions that.
No one questions it.
Hey,
that's how backwards
coal
it
miner.
is.
But then, yeah, exactly. And it's like, I really think that this is such an important awakening that people are having. Like, I remember at the beginning, it was like a lot of guilt around selling. And now I'm seeing the conversation on like, not being the martyr, not being the healer that can't afford her own healing is coming to the table. But I still see people who are not in those conversations be like, oh, you're trying to make money. You must be an unintegrous person. And it's like, no, like I need to pay my rent and live.
It's also just such a comment on like conscious circulation of money.
Yeah.
It's like, also, I know that if you pay for this thing that could potentially shift your life, like you are more likely to show up for it because you are investing energy into it, that money energy. So Yeah, I completely agree.
I remember my mom was just here and she was like, yeah, like, I was like, what's your Dharma? Like trying to help her find it. And she was like,
I love mom conversations.
You're like, welcome.
I'm like, what's your purpose? Come on, let's get out there.
Literally.
Yeah. And she was like, I don't know, maybe a life coach. But she was like, but I don't want to charge people. I'm like, well, people
Oh my
aren't
God,
gonna.
that is so our moms. It's
yeah.
ridiculous.
And I was like, well, people aren't going to take your advice seriously if you're not charging them. She was like, no, but like people don't have money. And I'm like, well, at least create like, maybe they give you flowers or something. Cause I was like, even in India, for example, the sadhus for homeless people, they're like, bring me fruit, bring me flowers, bring me something. So there's an energetic exchange because you'll actually take my advice more seriously when you're doing something to contribute to it too. And that to her, she was like, I don't know. Like, because they're so used to just like giving for free and I was like, also people need systems. Like people need to know, okay, I'm going to be working with you for the next 3 months. We're going to work together every 2 weeks and the result is going to be this. And that's actually going to make someone way more likely to do it instead of you just like listening to them talk one day for 6 hours and then like, then you're exhausted from it and you never help them again and you think you're helping, but you actually aren't. So we actually do need to create more systems and frameworks around healing and spiritual transformation to actually get the results that we want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so many good things I could talk to you girls forever, and you guys have a flight.
I know. I want to stay here all day.
Yes.
We're moving into this gorgeous place.
Yes, I can't wait. Well, thank you, Queen, so much for embodying your dharmas and sharing your missions and your truth so freely on your podcast. And where can listeners listen to your podcast and connect with you more?
Almost 30 on anywhere you listen to podcasts. We talk about health, wellness, spirituality, mostly spirituality. And then we're almost 30 podcasts on Instagram, and you can find us on all the socials. We have Podcast Pro, which helps people launch, grow, and monetize. So if you guys want to start a podcast, we can be your coaches for that. If you want to monetize your podcast, we can support you in that. And then we have a bunch of things in our shop, like our workshops, our workbooks, and some conscious apparel.
Yeah, and I'm at Lindsey Simcik on Instagram.
It's Krista. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Queens.
We love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
What an amazing conversation. I literally could talk to them forever. And it was hilarious because when this conversation was done, they looked at their phones. They're like, oh shit, we got to be at the airport in 10 minutes, which is 30 minutes away. And they like rushed to the airport and then forgot their phone and had to come back and like went back into the Uber. Luckily, they made their flight. They made it back okay, but it was just hilarious. And that's what happens when, I feel like when women get together, we just want to talk about all of the things. It was just so much fun for me to be a part of, and I hope it was fun for you to experience. So if you want to dive deeper into stories of how people discovered their Dharma and allow you to see the frameworks of how it happened, what path they took, what type of Dharma it was, what archetypes they had, and how this can be related to you, I really think we learned so much from hearing other people's stories, and it really shows us what's possible for ourselves as well. So I share all of this in my new book, Discover Your Dharma, a Vedic Guide to Finding Your Purpose. Now, you can head over to my website, iamsahararose.com/dharma, DHARMA. The link is in the show notes. And all you got to do is order the book wherever you get your books, a local bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, whatever that looks like for you. It's available internationally, but submit your receipt number on my website and you'll actually get epic bonuses, including tickets to my virtual book launch event where I will be answering your questions about the book, about living your Dharma, my meditation practice, tapping practice, and so much more. I also have resources available for you to start your own Discover Your Dharma book club with 4 orders, or even teach it to your community with 10 orders. So you can find all of that over at iamsahararose.com/dharma. The link is in the show notes, and I am so excited to share this book with you. You can also take my quiz, the dharmaarchetypequiz.com, to learn more about your Dharma archetype. I hope you loved this episode. I hope it inspired you to live your purpose out on the planet because the world needs it, and you never know how instrumental to the world's elevation it can become. So thank you for being you, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Namaste.